I used to believe my life was ordinary, predictable, almost invisible in its simplicity. To most people, I was just another man driving an aging truck to a city job. A man who lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood with trimmed hedges and maples that flamed orange in the fall. My name is Elias Thorne. I am 40 years old, and until recently, I thought my unremarkable routine was enough to keep my world steady. But life has a way of testing the strength of the walls you build, and mine were about to collapse in ways I could never have imagined. My mornings always began the same way. I would wake before the sun, shuffle into the kitchen, and listen to the soft hum of the coffee maker, as it filled the room with the scent of roasted beans. The ritual was comforting, almost sacred. I would stand by the counter, buttering plain toast, staring out the window at the prairies that stretched beyond the neighborhood. The fields rolled on endlessly, reminding me of my childhood on my parents' farm, a place where the horizon was always within reach, but never yours to hold. By 6:30, I would be dressed in one of my worn button-up shirts, a tie that had seen better days, and the same pair of slacks I had rotated through for years. Some might have thought I was careless or unwilling to keep up appearances, but I saw it differently. I valued quiet comfort over vanity. When I slid into my old Chevy truck, its engine sputtering to life like a grumpy companion, I always felt a sense of loyalty to it. That truck had carried me through storms, through long commutes, and even through late-night drives, when the weight of life pressed down too hard to sleep. My job was as dull as the beige walls of the finance office, where I spent most of my days. Endless spreadsheets, endless ticking clocks, endless chatter about promotions that never reached me. But I didn't mind, not entirely. I wasn't chasing titles or applause. What mattered most waited for me at home. Lucas. My son was 8 years old, with a mop of auburn curls that always refused to stay tamed, and eyes so green they reminded me of summer grass after the rain. Lucas was my anchor, the one steady flame in a life that sometimes felt dim. He loved to draw, landscapes, mostly. Rolling fields, rivers bending like ribbons, and wide skies dotted with clouds. I would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching him sketch with a focus that made me smile. He had inherited my quietness, but not my restraint. Where I had learned to bury my emotions, Lucas let his heart spill onto paper with every line of his pencil. It was for him that I endured everything else: the disapproving in-laws, the coldness creeping into my marriage, the whispers that I was a man without ambition. My wife, Sophia, was once the warmth in my life. She was beautiful, vibrant, and full of charm. When we first met, she had seen something in me others did not. Or at least I thought she did. But over the years, something changed. Perhaps it was her work managing a luxury resort, constantly surrounded by the city's elite. Perhaps it was her parents' voices in her ear, reminding her that she had married beneath her station. Her father, Reginald Harrington, was the kind of man who filled every room with his presence. Tall, broad, and forever dressed in tailored suits, he carried himself like a king among peasants. He owned swaths of Topeka through his real estate empire, and never let me forget that the house I lived in belonged to his portfolio. At family gatherings, he would lean back in his chair, sip his wine, and say things like, "You should really think about moving up, Elias. Sophia deserves someone who aspires to more." Her mother, Evelyn, was no less harsh, though her weapons were sharper in their subtlety. She ran a boutique that catered to the city's wealthiest women, dressing them for galas and charity balls. She would glance at my outdated clothes and smile sweetly before asking questions that cut like knives. "Elias, don't you ever feel stuck?" Isn't accounting such a small pond for a man your age? Then there was Marcus, Sophia's brother, who never missed a chance to belittle me. Face it, Elias, he would say with a smirk. You're just along for the ride. Dad's the one who really takes care of Sophia. For a long time, I let their words roll off my back. I told myself that humility was strength, that ignoring their scorn was better than fighting it. After all, I had a secret they knew nothing about. Beneath my modest exterior, I had built something they could never take from me. Late nights, after Lucas was asleep and Sophia was lost in her own world, I studied markets. I invested carefully, quietly, and over the years, I grew wealthier than any of them could imagine. I didn't flaunt it because I didn't need to. My fortune wasn't for show, it was for security, for Lucas, for the peace of knowing I could stand tall if I ever had to. But even the best laid foundations can crumble. It began one crisp autumn morning. The maples outside had turned a fiery red, and the air carried that faint chill that makes you reach for an extra layer. Lucas sat at the breakfast table, his head resting on his hand. His usual chatter was gone. Dad, my head hurts, he whispered, his face pale. I smiled softly, ruffling his curls. Probably just tired, buddy. You were up late drawing last night, remember? He nodded, but the sparkle in his eyes was dim. By afternoon, I got the call that changed everything. His school said he had collapsed. My heart stopped. I drove like a madman in that old Chevy, its engine groaning as if it, too, understood the urgency. When I reached the hospital, the world tilted beneath me. The doctor's words came like hammers. Late-stage brain tumor. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, my mind refusing to accept what I was hearing. How could an 8-year-old, full of life and dreams, be facing something so cruel? Sophia arrived hours later, her perfume filling the sterile room. She looked concerned, yes, but distant, like her mind was already elsewhere. She stayed only briefly, muttering something about a meeting she couldn't miss. In the days that followed, I never left Lucas's side. I watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his drawings slow until the pencil slipped from his fingers. He would look up at me and whisper, "Dad, can we go home? I just want to draw in the porch light again." My heart shattered each time, but I forced a smile, telling him stories of prairies and rivers, promising that one day we would sit there again, the Harringtons visited now and then, their presence more burden than comfort. Reginald's words stung the most. Did you even take him for regular checkups, Elias? Or were you too busy living small? Evelyn would sigh dramatically, saying, "This is why ambition matters. With better care, maybe this wouldn't have happened." I wanted to scream at them, to throw them out, but I stayed silent for Lucas's sake. That night, long after I returned home, I couldn't stop thinking about Harold and Beatrice. Their love had endured time, distance, and loss, yet somehow, it had found its way back into the world through me. It was as if fate had handed me a message wrapped inside someone else's story. It's never too late to feel alive again. For years, I had been surviving, not living. But that night, I lay awake with the strange warmth of hope humming quietly inside me. I hadn't felt that in a very long time. The next morning, I stood at my kitchen window, staring at my overgrown garden. The flowers Robert and I once tended together were now tangled and wild. The sight made me ache, but it also stirred something. I went outside, gloves in hand, and began to pull weeds. The air smelled of soil and sunlight. My back ached, my knees complained, but I didn't stop. When I finally looked around, I saw patches of life emerging again, tiny shoots of green against the dull brown earth. And for the first time in years, I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. The days that followed were different. I found reasons to step outside. I started walking through the market on weekends, greeting neighbors I had ignored for years. I even joined a small book club at the library, where the laughter of strangers slowly began to feel familiar. Something within me was shifting, like a door creaking open, after being closed for too long. A week later, I drove back to the Overlook. I wasn't sure if Harold would be there, but part of me hoped he would. When I arrived, he was standing at the railing, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, gazing out at the same endless view. When he turned and saw me, he smiled softly. "I knew you'd come," he said. I laughed. "I didn't plan to, but I guess the road knows my heart better than I do." We spent that afternoon talking. He told me about his years after Beatrice left, the small jobs he'd taken, the towns he'd lived in, the quiet evenings he spent reading her letters until the ink faded. I told him about Robert, about the years I had spent nursing him, and the silence that followed after he was gone. It was strange how easy it was to talk to Harold. Our griefs, though different, seemed to recognize each other. After that day, visiting the Overlook became a ritual. Every Sunday, I'd drive up with a picnic basket, or a thermos of tea. Harold would already be there, sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree, waiting. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we just sat in silence, watching the sky change colors. It felt peaceful, almost sacred. One afternoon, as we shared sandwiches by the railing, Harold said, "You know, this place used to belong to the past for me. But now, when you're here, it feels alive again." His words caught me off guard. I felt a warmth rush to my face. I wasn't sure how to answer, so I simply said, "Maybe Beatrice wanted that." He smiled, his eyes soft. Maybe she did. Weeks turned into months. What started as friendship began to feel like something deeper. A quiet companionship that filled the spaces where loneliness used to live. I found myself looking forward to his calls, his stories, even the way he teased me about always bringing too many sandwiches. The world that had once felt so small now seemed wide and full of color again. One afternoon in late summer, Harold brought a small wooden box. "Beatrice left this here for me," he said, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter written in delicate, looping handwriting. He read it aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "My dearest Harold, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. But know this, our love was never wasted. It carried me through a life I didn't choose, and it brought me back to peace. Don't spend the rest of your days in the shadows of what was. Live. Laugh. Love again. That's how you'll honor me. And to whoever finds you, be kind to her. She's part of the story too." When he finished, tears streaked down both our faces. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I placed my hand over his. "She was right," I said. "You deserve to live." Harold looked at me then, not as a stranger, not as a messenger from the past, but as someone who had somehow become part of his present. "So do you," he said quietly. From that day forward, something changed between us. We didn't name it, didn't rush it, but it was there, gentle, patient, and full of grace. We began meeting beyond the Overlook. He showed me the village where he grew up. I invited him over for dinner. We laughed like children rediscovering play. My children noticed my lightness, my laughter. "You seem different, Mom," my son said once. "Happier." I simply smiled and said, "Maybe I am." One evening, under a sky brushed with gold and rose, I finally spoke what had been growing quietly in my heart. "Harold," I said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." He looked at me for a long time, his eyes glistening. Then he whispered, You've shown me that the heart doesn't grow old, Clara. It just waits for someone to wake it up again. We sat together as the sun sank below the hills, his hand finding mine. It wasn't the wild love of youth, but something steadier, rooted in understanding, in shared loss, in gratitude. It felt like peace. The months that followed were the happiest I'd known in decades. We spent our mornings with coffee on my porch, our evenings walking through the park, our Sundays always at the Overlook. Even Sophia, when she met Harold, smiled through tears. My mother would be so happy, she said. I think she meant for this to happen. Then one morning, Harold coughed, a deep, rattling sound that didn't stop. A few tests later, the doctors said it was lung cancer, advanced and untreatable. My heart cracked, but he was calm. I've had more time than I expected, he said. And more joy than I thought possible. Let's not waste what's left of it. So we didn't. We lived fully. We drove to the sea, watched the sunrise from the hills, listened to old songs, and laughed until tears filled our eyes. And when his strength began to fade, I cared for him the way I once cared for Robert, but this time, there was no emptiness, only gratitude. On his last morning, he asked me to take him to the Overlook one final time. I parked the car and helped him to the bench beneath the oak. The air was cool, and the valley shimmered below us. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "These months with you, they've been the happiest of my life." When the wind stilled, I knew he was gone. I held his hand until the sunlight warmed it one last time. Now, I still visit that place, our sanctuary. I bring flowers, I watch the sunset, and I feel the peace he left behind. I live differently now. I laugh with my children, I travel, I love the world again. Because of Harold and Beatrice, I learned the greatest truth of all. It's never too late to begin again. It's never too late to love, to heal, or to live. The past may shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. What defines us are the choices we make with the time we have left, and I choose to live every day as if it's a gift.